Hi, welcome to another episode of Coffee and No Code. So this is going to be a fun one. So I've got Jordan, who leads our sales engineering team here, joining with me today. And it's another episode of Codeless Architecture, specifically focusing on integration. So integration is one of those words that I would say most enterprise projects that are written off and don't succeed, it's because of integration. It's because a software was brought into a firm that couldn't connect to the other systems. The legacy systems were still critically important. They couldn't talk to the newer technologies. Or in general, it's just a wiring that needs to take place from one language to another that is in this form of integration. So literally integration was so critical when we started the company. It was one of our core focuses. It's like, we have to do this right. I've used in the past all the integration software you probably have used yourself, and everything out there that's designed specifically for creating APIs and transforming data and mapping data. And what we decided to do in Unqork was create it the way it should have been created. And we had fun doing it. So with that, and with what codeless architecture is, and how the entire concept around connecting and the glue around all the systems that we see happening around us, we understand how critical integration is. So I want Jordan to first share a little bit about his background. He's now 23 months into Unqork, right about that 24 mark, the 2 years. Jordan, when he first started to join as leading our sales team, Jordan would tell you, I was one of the ones that always liked to do demos. And so even when Jordan was initially on the call, I would basically say, oh, let me show you what we could do and let's drive in. The second I saw Jordan operate one time in front of a client, Jordan would tell you, I backed off. And I'm like, that's it. I'm good. I'm going to sit back and just watch. And this show that we're doing today, Jordan and I, it's going to be one of these examples where it's pretty freeform. So Jordan's going to basically take it away and drive and show what integration means to him and what he sees in practice and what he hears from clients. So Jordan, start with a pretty much high level, who you are. Tell us.
Cool. Thanks, Gary. Yeah, it's been great being here at Unqork. It's close to 2 years now, as you mentioned. I had been at other prior no-code and low-codes for the last decade, though. So when I came to Unqork, specifically, one of the reasons I came was after I got to use the product. What I found were, back in that codeless architecture, doing no-code, we can actually build really complex applications. And importantly in that, you have your orchestrate layers where you can build a workflow and really bring in all your sources of truth into one clean user experience. I saw the presentation layer where you can really build that pixel perfect branded view using drag and drop components. But one of the biggest things I saw was not relying on code to actually build your integrations. So what I'm going to walk you through today is actually to show you how you can use integrations within Unqork to really augment your systems, really help automate some of that decisioning, as well as bringing in data from different sources of truth for validations, things like a KYC process, for instance, for more of those complex use cases. So I'm going to share my screen and then dive directly into the designer experience.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Gary. So what you see now is Workspaces. So whenever you're designing on Unqork, you can design your applications as you see fit. So like lines of business types of products, different types of applications across the board. It is a platform. So, and this is especially true for integrations. There's reusability across the entire system. So when you set up some functionality, when you ultimately start building some integrations, that can be reused across your system and using in share rights. What I do also already have is a pre-built demo that I've already that walks through asset management and a full deal workflow around case management. Within this application, you'll be able to see that we have a dynamic flow of data where we have workflows, a series of modules we've already created, and that workflow itself is a fully realized visual representation of your application. You'll see we have swim lanes here. Each swim lane corresponds to roles for individuals within that process. What's really important about this is you're designing a user experience through that flow. Now, what's important about this, and let's just kind of kick it off real quick. You can preview this as a front-end example, and then we can really set the style to automatically translate everything you say on the screen to that specific use case. So in this case, we're going to show you what that style can automatically change that screen. And you'll notice here on this asset management workflow, that you can go through the entire process of pulling in your data from your CRM system, running through case management tasks, including member assignment, NDAs, due diligence tasking, and really go through your full-fledged complex applications. Now, in this case, we've already built in one set of integrations. This one's going out to a CRM system called DealCloud, and pulling back the results directly from those systems. So as I select it, you'll see how it pre-populates data on the screen. But as your application evolve, as people use your application, it should evolve. It should optimize over time. It should improve and automate as you have users going through the system. So I'm going to do two things here for you, Gary. So first, I'm going to walk through and show you how you can embed an entirely new integration here. We're going to go to IEX and pull out a quote for this specific company. And then I'll also use this legal identifier information or legal entity information identifier, and then go out to Gleef, which is one of our pre-built connections in our marketplace, and show you how easily you can embed that directly from our marketplace directly into any of your applications for further validation on the data. So why don't we walk through real quick how you would make any changes to your application. In this case, we'll dive into the specific module that I just that begins this workflow. We're going to dive in specifically to that one section where you see project name, legal entity, LEI, company name, and opportunity size. What I want to do next is actually take that information and start building out a fully realized integration. So on the left here, you'll see your palette. You can drag and drop and create these elements and add them directly to your experience. In this case, I want to kind of add something in here. It's just a simple kind of text field. So with any of your configurations, what you'll do is obviously you'll set up label information. So we'll put the stock symbol in here. We want to name it from a key value pair perspective or property IDs. Property IDs, for those who haven't used Unqork yet, are how you reference it for any business rules or calculations. So think of it as a variable where you save data here as people interact with that field or component. But also, it ends up being your key value pair to your API. So any of these modules I'm showing, any of these workflows can be executed over API automatically. And then you ultimately can call and use this and send over a stock symbol, for instance, to call off this integration. So I'll call it a stock ticker. We'll use this for our application.
And Jordan, that's another key example. It's everyone speaks their own language. Everyone wants to call symbol or SYM or EQT or QSIP, whatever you're going to be using. People have their own dictionaries in their companies of how they refer to it. And so many times I've seen technologies come in and go, you have to fit in our box. You have to use our data dictionary and our definition. And what we say is, no, integration should just be mapping. It should be, here's what you call it, here's what we call it. So you're calling it symbol or equity symbol, and that's your definition. That's what you're comfortable with. It should be like that. It should be that free.
100%. And what we're going to actually show you now is how you do that mapping exercise. Again, you're not coding when you're doing your integrations from scratch. And so like any kind of designer or creator in Unqork, or any application development, you'll look at a documentation. So I have this documentation from IEX Cloud that will help me pull back recent quoting information for a stock symbol. And so what I can do is take this documentation and look at specifically the information on the screen here for the kind of the endpoint URL. I can dive into the administration. We'll click on administration within this task. And this might be more of an IT governance aspect, right? So you can see how I can drag and drop activities in there, but maybe your IT might have the keys to the kingdom. They might have the authentication to set up for that service authentication. Now, in Unqork, this is especially impactful. Once you create that authentication to your service, you can use it across the system. So create it once and then reuse it, especially when you have an API gateway where it's one authentication and you can point to multiple different endpoints. It really saves you a lot of time. And as I'm showing you these APIs, and I mentioned APIs are readily available out of the box, you don't need necessarily a separate API coder or developer. It's all built into the platform, so it saves you a lot of time.
What would you, Jordan, in traditional development, coding, right? So you're going to call an IEX exchange. So it's going to do a stock lookup. How would you do that outside of Unqork or any low code? so far?
Ultimately, you would have to create your own authentication channel or custom authentication to connect to it. Ultimately, if you think about and we probably have an example in here from like a curl, you'll actually have to write out these web services to reflect that authentication. That's especially difficult if you think about every time you make a call to a system, you have to reset up your authentication. So not only are you coding and putting in there the exact details, Unqork will automatically set it up so it encrypts the data. You only see, say, asterisks when you add your token in there. But what it does too is it lets you reuse it. Instead of having to go back and every time I want to call this integration, set up my authentication again in this exact same format, we can just call this as, think of it as its own component for authentication, and then reuse it consistently across the board. That makes it easier to update in one place, and also allows you to really get up and running and focus on business functionality. What is the data I'm sending to the service, and what's the response back that is required for the functionality I'm trying to develop?
It's a key point. Stressing that if there's 10 developers in a company, in a bank, coding a system to do, it could be a portfolio management system and get the latest price from IEX, they're all going to use a little different approach to get to the API. And they're going to each build their own authentication. They're going to each build their own library. Some of these APIs are protected by certificates, which expire, licenses and 509 certs and other. And, then you got to maintain those licenses. And I've been on that side where, we found the system went down because the license expired. No one was watching the license management. And then when we actually got the new certificate to issue, you had to then track back and do dependencies to figure out where the old certificate's based, and you couldn't find them. It was basically a game of watching what went up and down to see who was using it. And so what you're showing here is an administration panel which says centrally maintain a single point to IEX, right? So this is your entrance point to IEX, and then therefore maintain it only here. It's an abstraction layer.
And that abstraction layer goes further. Even having, say, additional handshakes, or you mentioned certificate, you can set up your certificate once to connect to those systems and just update it from one clean view. It's an upload, essentially. And all that requires you to do is set it up once and then really securitize it. And everything in Unqork at rest in transit is encrypted, but we also even provide you with private link, and you can set that up within a graphical user interface to connect VPC to VPC connection. So extra security layers are still no code. And so all of that, those activities you're normally doing from a custom dev perspective are really short-circuited because you can do it out of the box through this abstraction layer. Now, let me walk you real quick through how you would set up authentication. So in this case, I titled this service, I gave it a name. This is how it appears in the dropdown when I want to select it to start configuring that integration. I'll point to this specific URL. Again, that's the endpoint URL that we're expecting from this service. So if you had, say, DocuSign or another CRM system, you could easily point to that URL, especially the specific location where your data is. Now, you'll set up a type of authentication, and we support a flexible model. So all parts of OAuth, bearer token, basic auth, certificate, even down to SFTP or FTP. What that really provides you is a flexibility to not just the third-party vendors that are industry standards, but anything that you have internally, we can connect to, whether that's a modern REST or SOAP-based service or more legacy tech through SFTP. Through no code, we can actually integrate to those services. And so this is a note, it doesn't require any authentication in here. So I'm just going to add it as a service. All I have to click is add. You'll notice here that we can also log it. Everything within Unqork, we have server logs built out of it that automatically will capture who made the request, when the request was made, how long it took, what the request was, and what the response was back. You can even use that data within our Unqork development lifecycle toolkit to create your own test cases automatically out of that. So if you want to run your APIs through automated testing, use existing test cases that you've already run through there based on data that you have in your system, then you easily can keep running that and ensure that that API works not just today, but for further automated testing for production applications.
And back to the abilities, I see that you could actually set up PagerDuty. You could say, if this service goes down, because we proxy the service, in that case, when you chose that, you could proxy the service to Unqork, we'll know when it goes down. So like that whole idea of being self-sufficient. So I always hated as a scale when I get a call from the business telling me that the app's down and the alerting didn't pick it up, the monitoring didn't pick it up. The goal is that, you should be alerted when your API goes down before your clients tell you That's got to be the world that we live in today.
100%. And you can actually you can send alerts through Unqork if there's any error logs to this, any slow logs, and automatically be alerted of that through email with your own set of validations or prioritization on there as well. So we provide you all sorts of error handling built into the product to let that happen. Now, once I've added to the system, you can see here at the bottom here, you can see IEX has been added there. Now we can use it throughout the system. Now we have other examples in this here. So maybe you might have something like a Salesforce or something. Just to show you what this looks like, anytime you want to connect to a type of authentication, you'll have that graphical user interface to fill out the details. And that's especially important when you talk about connecting to services using those service accounts. But why don't we jump into and start using that plugin? So you'll go to the components here, use plugin. It's under the data and event processing section. I'll call this plug stock price. And then we'll put that in the property ID. That's how, again, you'll have to reference it for any of your calls. I also have that stock ticker in here. So we're going to pull that over to see what that endpoint we require. So once I select this external services here, now IEX has that example in here. Let me refresh it so it's part of that dropdown. So now that I come in here, I can go in immediately and start pulling in that plugin data. So let's pull in that plugin. We'll call that service. So plugin get stock. I'll pull it from that dropdown. So we'll pull in IEX, and you'll see that URL is already available there. So what you're doing is you're pointing to that specific URL, and then you can define the endpoints. IEX, for instance, has a number of different endpoints that you could use, but that authentication uses across that system. So based on the functionality I'm trying to accomplish, I could, for instance, look up dividends, balance sheet, cash flow, other things that might be required for me to make my decisions based on insights coming from third parties. In this case, what I'll do is I'll actually pass in the endpoint that is required to call that service. So I'll say stock, we'll do, I think I called it stock ticker. Simple ticker, that's what I called it. So what you'll do is pass directly in there. You can pass the value directly into the quote here, or you can do something like inputs and outputs. So what Unqork allows you to do is think of your inputs as your parameters to the system if it's a GET. So anytime you want to pass in data to your system, what it's expecting is a parameter called token, and we'll pass in a unique identifier for that token. In this case, what you'll end up doing is passing in as a property ID the value, and think of it as a parameter into your values. We also can use headers as inputs, so think of your authentication as ways to do that, or even resolve 64. So if you wanted to automatically send it through documents that you might be generating on Unqork for an e-signature solution, you could do that directly within the platform. And then vice versa, we can return the values and then save it to something in Unqork. So if I want to map back the value as a response into an output, we can create a property ID that asserts it directly there. So let me save that there. We'll add a little text field in here to show what price, real-time quote. So price. Real.
And are you doing this event-driven, or you're going to do this manually trigger? So there's two ways to basically call that. So let's see.
Good call out. So what we can do are two different ways. So when we set this stock symbol up, because we have we want to have something in the stock symbol for us to execute it, we can use something called Unqork uses declarative. So we use an action. It's a trigger action. So anytime I want to call that service now, all I have to do is plug get stock, and it automatically, when someone interacts with this field, will immediately call that web service. That's especially important when you're thinking about determining the user's control flow and make it highly performant. Don't load everything at once. Only load it once it's required in the application. And then, of course, as we go down to this real-time quote, we want to set the value back in there. So we'll do that IEX and then real stock price ticker as well and the response. Okay, cool. So what we've done so far, just to reflect on what we built an authentication. The URL pointed directly to that URL that's part of that authentication. So we've authenticated to the app. We've set up the endpoint for what we want. We want to get a stock quote based on that symbol that's passed through. We can have inputs into the system. And that could be any of your parameters, headers, and any kind of other information from a documents perspective. And then we could parse out the information automatically without coding back into any of your visualizations. So your components like grids, charts, as well as any of your text fields, number fields, and so forth. Now, I can save this and we can automatically execute it, but I wanted to show a little additional capabilities that are available within the plugin, which save you a lot of time when you're developing. So first of all, we can do concurrent or daisy chain based calls. So if you want to say pull in a bearer token first or authentication token and use that for a subsequent call, you can use a post trigger here. So really daisy chain or one after the other in sequential order, really build out your plugin infrastructure. You also have built-in error handling for messages. So you can send out emails, you can alert the individual in the front end, you can retry it, run to bounces and so forth directly in the platform.
So I guess, Jordan, in traditional languages, you would have try catch, right? You'd have basically 100%. You try, make the call to the service is down, catch it, do something with it. And that's try catch. That's basically here is like if there's an error, you could create in Unqork centralized error handling, right? So if there's any of your services go down, call this one module for it to basically tell the customer, alert you, and either stop them or continue, deciding what you want to do.
And way easier to troubleshoot because you're using out-of-the-box no-code configurations like a business table to define what the user sees, who is alerted of that error, how is it retried. And so all of that is very clear to maintain and update as needed because it's no code. Now you also
you have debounce there. I saw you have number of retries, you have delays to try. So all those are things which customers have come to you and said, this is the features we need. We need, automatic retries. If the service is down, try it again. Let's see it again.
Yeah. Honestly, it's so nice. It's already async processing, but it's so interesting when you can say, okay, how do you do server-side pagination and how many results you want to pull back from that service? I can just say 5 results here. Or if it's if I want sync processing versus async, I just select that button. Or something very difficult that you would normally have to really parse through and process data, like transforming a SOAP service response into JSON, I can check that box there and automatically will change a more legacy SOAP-based response into something that is using JSON that we can parse across the system. And those kind of checkboxes really save me time over time with these types of configurations. So why don't
I know there's one more, if you scroll up, there's one feature I do remember myself early on in the days. If we go to that option to replace under option in outputs.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's really interesting. So I remember there was a client requirement that said, you're going to call my web service and I'm going to return you data from my CRM tool or my insurance platform. But I only want you to override what we return. And otherwise I want you to basically, and if we return you data from our system, I want you to disable the field. So that's where you see options like disable there, which is like if the web service returns the name, disable the name field. If they don't, let the customer type it in because we didn't have it in our source system. So it's really interesting how you see these features materialize and go through.
100%, and how easy this is. And those kind of drop downs are available across all this no code configuration. So say making something visible, show hide, changing values or updating based on many conditions. Very seamless within the experience here on Unqork. So why don't I save this here? We can save this again and then actually see how the changes are shown within that screen. No, Unqork is adaptive. So immediately as I update that, you'll see on the module that we have those new stock tickers. We can kick off one of these. I can click the shell, and then you'll notice that stock quote already showed up here. Now everything is responsive, so you can do this across your devices. But what I want to show here in the tool set is that we can actually see what that response is, just to show you how we made that call. So let me refresh it. I'm going to show you how we can easily integrate and then call that service, and then we'll call something like shell. That response, this is all the data that's coming back here. And so when I said, hey, I want to use the latest price or I want to use real-time price quote, that's exactly what's coming from that section and then automatically filling out the details here. And we can do this for any of your services to be able to pull that data in real time, not just AEX, but other services as needed. And now, let me show you an example here, how we could update something using our marketplace. So we have a bunch of snippets. This came out last year, and you have an opportunity to reuse a lot of our technology partners. So we've already built out functionality where the plugins are already set up, as are all the different ways you want to integrate. So what I'll show you right now is, you'll see here we have something called snippets. Snippets allow you to reuse functionality across your system. So you have marketplace snippets that have industry templates, like automatically validating a VIN lookup for your unique vehicle identifier, or things like a credit score with Experian. Now, you can create any of these as snippets. So if you want to reuse any of your integrations as a drag and drop feature, you can easily build that into the process. But let's take a look real quick at our marketplace so I can show you how you can reuse a lot of these integrations that are pre-built for you. So you notice at the top here, it's already, it knows who I am. It's signed in through your environment. You can see the target environment, because this is how it will actually, by point and click, it'll automatically send all the configuration to that environment. You'll see that there are built out of this already a number of templates in here for things like that entry stuff, like NAICS codes, for instance. But what I really want to focus on are these integrations. So integrations allow us to really get up and running. You see Carpe Data, which does risk factors, Codat, which connects to accounting systems like NetSuite or others, DocuSign flows, and so forth. What I want to show you right now is Gleef. So because we already had that legal entity identifier, we can easily call this system and then return results based on that LEI. So we're going to call Gleef, which will provide us the full legal information around that company. Now, you'll see it's already installed in the environment. If it wasn't installed, all you have to do is click on that. It'll immediately be available for you to reuse across your environment. Once available, you can go into your templates, and templates are really where you can create and reuse any of the functionality. So it'll automatically create that service authentication for you. So it'll set up that authentication you want to connect to. And all I have to do is create app from template. I can determine which workspace I want it in. So I can put in AOS, that's the one we had before. I'll say it's Gleef 2. We can set up styles against it as well, and automatically pull all of the content from that pre-built connection. So let's create that app. Now, if I go back to that workspace that we had before, you'll see not only do we have that dynamic workflow, but it just created this Gleef integration. One, you can call anything via API within Unqork, so you can pass this in and through a server-side execution and call this from any of your third-party systems as well. So if you want to execute and call Gleef based on a legal entity from one of your other applications in your enterprise, all you have to do is call that from Unqork and then immediately execute that from an API perspective. But also, now we have pre-built functionality here that we can really build into the platform. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'll show you, you enter an LEI, it's going to execute and call the legal identifier information and automatically fill out the rest of the details, including the registration status. And on Unqork, that reusability is paramount. So what you can really do very easily is just import a panel from a component perspective. Put a panel in here. You can import that panel, and we'll just call it Gleef. We'll search that LEI. That'll be the information that's available.
Actually, could you go back, Jordan, for 1 second, just to show, like, everyone who's done object-oriented programming, the concept of the parent-child relationships, and do you break the relationship in a copy, or do you import it in real time, or do you want to apply it? What we did here is we basically said that you're importing this as a reference, which means keep a live update to that panel, and you're choosing to automatically apply it, which means if someone centrally maintained Gleef as that module, you automatically receive all their latest updates immediately without any choice. But you could also switch it to manual and say, hey, I want to basically decide when to apply that update or not. So it's in your choice to apply it, or you could break it and make a copy. But like those are the features which any system needs in coding, but it's what you need in no code and codeless architecture the most. It's the features you need for reuse and scale.
100%. I love the reference one, because I think it allows us to update it as needed. You can also create those copies. So if you want to have like a template and then reuse it, slightly change it per your use case, just select copy, and then it automatically import that information directly into the module once you save it. Now, all that information is available to me for it to call. Now, there's a couple things I'm going to delete on here because I don't need it. Search by LEI, for instance. And then what I'll do is I will delete this little LEI, and then I will use this legal identifier to use this specific data point within the call. I'm going to do this on a trigger. As you mentioned, Gary, we're going to do this on a watch. So once this is available, then it'll automatically call that service. Again, Unqork can be responsive, or it's declarative. So once you want to say a value is available, then you can call that service, and that could be an automated kind of decision or flow. Now I'm going to say save. We're going to save it again and then execute this logic directly on the screen. So one more time, let's load this up. Now we have at least two API calls. We actually have 3 with Deal Cloud. And now anytime I select from this dropdown, it's going to call and return results for it. So if I change any of these values to Vulkan, for instance, or Zeus, Project Zeus, you'll see the values are changing on that screen based on those calls that we're making. And anytime that we want to continue to update that, then we can easily call it at any time with those updated results, but it helps validate the data in that system. Now, one last thing, Gary, that I wanted to show here, I'll kind of exit out of this. Let's just call that one as an API as well. So best practices on Unqork is you largely run all the server side. You don't want to show the client all that information. But within Unqork, what you can do is use server-side execution to call any of the services. You'll see server-side execution. Unqork is automatically an API layer on top. You don't have to create it. You don't have to have someone else in your organization build these APIs. It's readily available to you. So in this case, what I'll do is put in search LEI, put in the value for that LEI, and it'll immediately execute the values and show me the results for it. That response back has a full, all the metadata. So all the LEI records, including relationships that might be coming from that service. And then if I wanted to, I can fully debug all those services. So it's easy for me to see all the changes in the data over time as it's being executed over that API. Now, not only do we have, does your application around asset management have this leaf lookup, but across your enterprise, if you wanted to, you can call via REST API and immediately call this service and return results for a legal entity identifier.
So in that case, Jordan, just an example would be is you passed it a name of a company, it did a glyph lookup, comes back and gets a symbol, looks up in the symbol now in IEX to get the latest price.
100%.
You could orchestrate those, chain those events to basically say when the first comes back, take this output, go to the second one, get the price. And now you could basically save that as an API in Unqork that others call. So anywhere in Unqork, you could say, I want to do a lookup and get back the price in one shot. And you stop worrying about IEX, you stop worrying about Glyph, you stop worrying about LEI and all the IDs. It's all hidden for you in that case.
Absolutely. And that provides you a lot of ways of focusing on the functionality. What do you want to accomplish versus the minutia of how to code it out. Now, one last thing is the service log. So Unqork provides you out of the box the Unqork development lifecycle. That's how you plan, test, promote, and then monitor your application once it's in production. One of those things that it does come with is the service logs dashboard. Allows you to set up alerts if there's a specific service you want to call against. I can pre-filter any of the results and see the results that come back from those services. And we can use these for subsequent API tests if we wanted to. Now you'll notice here that we can see all the results back from those service logs, and you can see the response value that came back as part of that calculation.
It's 196 milliseconds, not bad. And that was the round trip time to basically do the lookup for the price. Absolutely. That's awesome.
Very fast. Cool. Well, Gary, that's what I showed today around integration. So just to recap, we walked through integrating with a entirely new service that was IEX. We added it to an existing application to really build out more functionality quickly. Like most of Unqork, you're not maintaining code, so you really can focus on more and more features for your customers. And then I showed you Marketplace, where we really could then, we have a lot of pre-built integrations that allow you to really embed those even quicker. So within minutes, you saw me really build out multiple different integrations in different formats. And we even showed you how you can execute Unqork as an API if you wanted to use any of this functionality across your enterprise.
That's amazing, Jordan. And I know we have clients. I know one client specifically with 312 different integrations back to their core systems from Unqork. And so it's you make it look really easy and seamless. And that's what I love watching whenever you're doing this. I'm sitting back and just enjoying, and it's amazing to see how it comes. But in it works, which is the critical thing in highly complex production. And that's really what it comes down to, is you orchestrated with Codeless Architecture multiple systems talking to each other without code, without the maintenance around that code. Because that's the key has always been, make system A talk to system B. It requires code. It requires customization, and it's fragile. And then someone asks, what if I change B? Who's impacted? And they don't even know A exists. So that whole aspect of what you showed here is amazing. So again, I appreciate you joining us here, talking about integration and uses, and you were able to do bi-directional, both coming into Unqork, going out of Unqork, and setup. So this has been fun. Thank you, Jordan, for joining us again, and I appreciate everyone else for tuning in. Another episode, Coffee and No Code. So thanks to everyone, and have a great day. Enjoy. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.